Hey guys, Stephen here from The Truth About Dyslexia. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about Donald Trump. Does he have dyslexia? And let's talk about the traits that we can see. Now, for everyone here, this is a bit of a spicy topic. I'm not here to fight on politics, and I'm not a doctor, so I'm not here to diagnose him one-to-one. But I probably see Donald Trump sometimes more than my wife because he's always on the news. And, don't tell my wife I said that. It's just a bit of a joke. But honestly, don't tell her. She will come and get me. So let's dive into today's episode. Okay, so you may be wondering, what is he wearing? Has he lost his mind? If you're watching this on Spotify, you'll be able to see it, or jump across to my TikTok and you'll see a video of what I'm wearing. And this was a Temu purchase that I purchased very speedily when I must have needed some dopamine, and it popped up in the mail. I'm not sure anyone else has ever purchased something they may have regretted or may have thought, why did I do that? You just have to laugh sometimes, right? But let's dive into today's podcast. The reason I wanted to do this is sometimes we can learn more about dyslexia by looking at other people and how they are in the world. I find it easy, we try not to compare ourselves, but it can be a fantastic tool to understand things that are visual and real. So if we look at Donald, the first big thing that we see is big picture thinking. And we see this a lot with dyslexics. Whether you like him or not, he's renowned for his ability to think broadly. He doesn't get bogged down in the tiny details. We probably sometimes might like it a few more details from time to time, but he is a really big overarching thinker, potentially too overarching, but that's the thing. He's good at the big stuff, which is what you kind of do need in a leader. You need someone who can look at the big stuff and doesn't get bogged down on the stuff that other people can handle. You just hope the people around them are handling it well. A good example is the Make America Great Again slogan. It's not about a detailed policy, but he was brilliant at repeating that phrase and repeating that big picture idea so people knew what he was doing, right? It's a big emotional picture that really resonates. It's not fine print. So the first dyslexic trait that I see is that big picture thinking, which I see for many dyslexics. The second is difficulty with written communication. Do you remember back, I think this was his first term, the covfefe big thing, which became like a famous thing when he was trying to spell coffee. He spelled covfefe. Now, you could say, hey, one spelling mistake doesn't make you dyslexic, but I'll let you go and look at, what is it, Truth Social that he's on. One thing I can say is he definitely types a lot of his, or puts in a lot of his own messages, because there are a lot of spelling mistakes. I don't think I've ever seen someone use full capitals as much as that. And you also see something I see in dyslexics a lot is block thinking. He doesn't use paragraphs. He just uses a bulk blah. And you see this with dyslexics because our brains don't naturally paragraph topics. Like, I've personally learnt to break down paragraphs. It took a long time. I don't do it very well. I just break it down because I know how much a big brain dumper text just shows how dyslexic you are. And we see that a lot in what Trump does. The amount of grammar errors he's had, even when he's speaking verbally, you just see how his brain has mixed up words really, really easily as well. So that's another trait from the dyslexic storybook. And number 3, he's a strong verbal communicator. Like myself, I love talking, I love speaking, and I love speaking in metaphors and similes and examples. Trump is, whether we like him or not, he's undeniably a great speaker. Look at how long he can stand in front of crowds just talking about everything his brain goes through. You think about these rabbit holes we go down as dyslexics. Your brain's so visual. His rabbit holes, he just says them out loud. That's a whole nother level, right? He just literally will go down rabbit holes. At one point, he was talking about windmills causing cancer. Maybe I got that wrong, but that was just a memory that's come to me. He's had some really interesting stories. And in his rallies, he can do 2 hours on stage just talking about anything that comes to mind and telling stories. And he's good at painting pictures with his words, right? That's why people seem to like him. Now, trait number 4, challenges with reading publicly. Now, one of the things we've seen from him is he's not a good reader in public. During formal addresses, he often goes off script, appears to struggle with pronunciation, pacing, and loses his place, so he ends up ad-libbing what he's talking about. This is why he's a much better orator when it's coming from his head, not from reading the teleprompter. And so you can kind of see that's what's going through his brain at any one moment. It's pretty clear. This one's probably one of the more obvious dyslexic traits that, I could probably do a montage of stuff, and I might see if I can clip a few things in here because it's so clear. Trait number 5, Creative problem solving. You know, the one thing about Trump, you got to give it to him. He is a creative problem solver, and he likes to tackle big problems like many dyslexics. You know, he's always looking at the big things. Do you remember in his first term, the whole Kim Jong-un and the DMZ, handshake, where he actually ended up in North Korea? Like, I think he's the only president to ever have been to North Korea. He's really open to, unstandard was the term I was going to use, non-standard ways of doing things. When he came into presidency, I always said, because my take on him is he is dyslexic, this is just my personal opinion, is that half of the things he does will be amazing for the country and half of them will be terrible. And it's just deciding which wins out at the end of the 4-year term. And that's everyone's got their own opinion on this, I'm sure. But again, the way he solves things is creative. It's not boring. He's not doing the thing that is in the books, right? And all of these traits, I don't think anyone can disagree with them. I'd love to see someone disagree with them, and feel free to comment if you can find a place to comment. I'm sure everyone has an idea, but a lot of these are quite obvious. Trait number 6, what you see with Trump is repetitive language and limited vocabulary. Dyslexics sometimes rely heavily on smaller vocabulary and repeat phrases. Trump's famous for repeating the same phrase like believe me, or tremendous, or fake news over and over again. In debates, interviews, he just loops the same high impact words. And this isn't laziness. It's just how the brain simplifies complex thoughts into digestible sound bites. I probably say, a lot, or did that make sense? I say these things repeatedly because it takes less of my brain to actually operate and to use those. So all of these points are a variety of different ways to see, or traits that are dyslexic. All 6 of these traits are very common with people with dyslexia. Now, Trump, again, this isn't to say he's good or bad because of this. It's just to point out some things. You may recognize some of these in yourself. Doesn't make you good or bad. Doesn't make you Donald Trump. Like, he's a very unique person, whether he has dyslexia or not. But these are all very common traits that can't be looked past. And in my personal opinion, Donald, you've got dyslexia. I think you've done well enough in life that you probably can get by without a diagnosis, and you can just keep going. But it'd be interesting to find out if anyone in his family had been diagnosed. I don't know if anyone has. It would just be very interesting because it does go down a kind of lineage. But, if you've got any questions, again, pop me an email at hello@truthaboutdyslexia, pop a comment in. Thank you for everyone who's been supporting the supplement brand we're kicking off. We're going to be sending out a few more emails about that. I'd love to get your feedback. So if you're on our newsletter email list, please respond. I really appreciate thoughts because I want to create a product that really supports dyslexics, people with ADHD, to sleep better. That's our first goal, is to give you guys awesome sleep, because with better sleep comes a better day as a dyslexic. Have an epic rest of your day, and I'll be back next week.